What does it truly mean when someone walks away without saying a word? No goodbye, no explanation, no final conversation, just silence, where a person used to be. Maybe you've experienced it yourself. One day, they were part of your daily life. Their messages appeared on your screen, their voice filled your evenings, their presence felt permanent, and then suddenly, they vanished. Not with anger, not with a dramatic ending, not even with a reason, just silence. And strangely, that silence hurt more than any argument ever could, because when someone yells at you, at least you know where you stand. When someone blames you, at least there are words to examine. But when someone disappears without explanation, they leave behind something far heavier than rejection. They leave questions that replay in your mind at 2 a.m. What did I do wrong? Did they ever care? Was everything we shared a lie? And perhaps the most painful question of all, why wasn't I worth an explanation? But what if the silence was never really about you? What if the unanswered goodbye reveals something deeper about human nature? Something most people spend their entire lives misunderstanding. Tonight, we're going beyond heartbreak, beyond abandonment, beyond the obvious. Because when someone walks away without saying a word, they aren't just leaving your life, they're revealing something about themselves. And if you understand what that silence truly means, you may stop chasing answers from people who were never capable of giving them. Stay with me until the end, because the final lesson may completely change how you view every person who has ever left you behind. Part 1. The silence is often a confession. They just gave it in the language of silence. Most people believe closure comes from words. They imagine that if they could just sit down one final time with the person who left, everything would suddenly make sense. But life rarely works that way. In reality, some of the most important truths are never spoken. Think about a house with cracks in its foundation. The owner keeps painting the walls, keeps decorating the rooms, keeps pretending everything is fine. But one day, the house collapses. The collapse isn't the beginning of the problem. It's the result of a problem that existed long before. Human relationships work the same way. When someone walks away without speaking, their silence often reveals a truth they were unable, unwilling, or emotionally incapable of expressing. Maybe they lacked the courage to have an uncomfortable conversation. Maybe they feared confrontation. Maybe they didn't fully understand their own feelings, or perhaps they knew exactly what they felt, but didn't want to face the consequences of saying it aloud. The psychologist Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Many people live unconsciously. They avoid difficult emotions. They run from uncomfortable truths. They escape rather than communicate. And when such people leave, they don't leave with explanations. They leave with silence. The painful part is that the abandoned person often interprets this silence as evidence of their own unworthiness. But silence is not always a statement about your value. Sometimes it is simply evidence of another person's limitations. A mature person communicates. An emotionally developed person confronts reality. An accountable person explains. But a person trapped in fear often disappears. And that's the first lesson. Sometimes silence isn't the absence of an answer. Sometimes silence is the answer. Not the answer you wanted, but the answer they were capable of giving. And once you understand that, you stop begging closed doors to explain why they closed. You begin looking inward instead of backward. Part 2. Why the human mind becomes addicted to unanswered goodbyes. It's spending years trying to understand why. Have you ever noticed something strange about the human mind? When a story ends clearly, we eventually move on. But when a story ends in the middle of a sentence, we carry it with us. A book with the final chapter missing bothers us. A movie that suddenly cuts to black leaves us restless. And relationships are no different. The mind craves completion. It wants patterns, meaning, conclusions. When someone walks away without explanation, your brain begins searching endlessly for the missing piece. It becomes a detective investigating a crime that may never be solved. You replay old conversations, you reread messages, you analyze their tone, you examine tiny details that once seemed insignificant. Suddenly, every memory becomes evidence. Every moment becomes a clue. And without realizing it, you've stopped living in the present. You're living inside a courtroom built from the past. This is why silent departures often hurt longer than honest rejections. A rejection gives pain, but ambiguity gives obsession. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche observed that people can endure almost any suffering if they understand its meaning. What destroys us isn't always pain itself. It's confusion, it's uncertainty, it's not knowing. Imagine being lost in a forest. If someone tells you the path home is 10 miles away, you'll suffer, but you'll keep walking. But if nobody tells you where you are, every direction feels wrong. Every step becomes exhausting. That is exactly what unexplained abandonment feels like. The heart isn't merely grieving a person, it's grieving certainty. And here's where many people become trapped. They believe closure is something another person must give them. So they wait. They wait for a message, an apology, an explanation, a sudden return, but years pass, and the answer never comes because closure was never hidden inside their words. Closure begins the moment you accept that some questions will remain unanswered. The Buddha taught that attachment is often the root of suffering. Most people think attachment means clinging to a person, but sometimes we become attached to an explanation, attached to a reason, attached to a version of the story that makes us feel better, and that attachment quietly keeps us imprisoned. The truth is difficult. You may never know exactly why they left. You may never hear the explanation you've imagined 1,000 times. But healing begins when you stop demanding certainty from a world that rarely offers it. Because the moment you stop chasing answers, you start reclaiming your life. And that is where freedom quietly begins. Part 3. The hidden truth. Sometimes people leave because your presence exposes what they refuse to face. What if they left because being around you forced them to confront something within themselves they weren't ready to see? This is one of the most painful truths about human relationships. We assume that when someone walks away, it must be because of something lacking in us, not attractive enough, not interesting enough, not valuable enough. But life is often far more complicated than that. Sometimes people leave not because of who you are, but because of what you reflect back to them. Think of a mirror. A mirror does not create flaws. It simply reveals them. And many people spend their lives avoiding mirrors. Carl Jung believed that every human being carries a shadow, the hidden parts of themselves they refuse to acknowledge, their fears, their insecurities, their selfishness, their wounds, their unresolved pain. Most people don't consciously know these shadows exist, but they feel uncomfortable whenever something threatens to expose them, and sometimes, without realizing it, you become that threat. Perhaps your honesty highlighted their dishonesty. Perhaps your loyalty exposed their inconsistency. Perhaps your emotional depth revealed their emotional avoidance. Perhaps your growth reminded them of how long they had remained stagnant. Your existence became a silent reminder of something they weren't ready to confront. So instead of facing themselves, they walked away. Not because you were wrong, not because you failed, but because leaving felt easier than self-reflection. Imagine standing in a room with bright light after years of living in darkness. The light isn't hurting you, it's simply revealing what was already there. Yet many people blame the light. They run from it. They escape it, because seeing clearly requires responsibility. And responsibility is frightening. This is why some people disappear precisely when relationships begin becoming meaningful. The deeper the connection becomes, the harder it is to hide. Masks begin to crack. Pretenses begin to fade, truth begins to emerge, and not everyone is prepared for that journey. The philosopher Socrates famously said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." But examining life requires courage. Examining yourself requires even more. Many people desire love. Far fewer desire transformation, because real connection doesn't just comfort us. It reveals us, it exposes us, it asks us to grow, and growth often feels threatening to those committed to remaining the same. So if someone walked away without explanation, ask yourself this: is it possible that their departure says more about their relationship with themselves than their relationship with you? The answer may not erase the pain, but it can free you from carrying a burden that was never yours, because not every departure is a verdict on your worth. Sometimes it's evidence of another person's unfinished battle with themselves. And understanding that changes everything. You stop viewing yourself as the reason they left and begin seeing yourself as the chapter they weren't ready to read. Part 4. The greatest revenge is not understanding why they left. It's becoming someone who no longer needs the answer, and that is the moment your healing truly begins. For a long time, you may have believed that peace was waiting on the other side of an explanation. You imagined a conversation, a confession, a message appearing unexpectedly after months or years of silence. You believed that if they could just tell you why they left, the wound would finally close. But life has a strange way of teaching deeper lessons, because eventually, if you keep growing, something shifts. You wake up one morning and realize that the question itself no longer controls you. The person who once occupied your thoughts every day becomes a distant chapter, not because what happened was unimportant, but because you have become larger than the wound. Imagine carrying a heavy stone in your hands. At first, it feels impossible to put down. You examine it constantly. You wonder where it came from, who gave it to you, why it was placed in your life. But years later, you discover something profound. The weight was never in the stone. The weight was in your refusal to release it. This is what many people misunderstand about healing. Healing is not finding all the answers. Healing is reaching a place where the answers are no longer required. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The people who leave, the words they never said, the explanations they never gave, those things belong to the realm of outside events. You cannot control them. You never could. But your response, your growth, your future, those have always belonged to you. And this realization changes the entire story, because the moment you stop asking, "Why did they leave me?" you begin asking a far more powerful question. What can I become because they left? Suddenly, the pain transforms. The abandonment becomes a teacher. The silence becomes a lesson. The loss becomes a doorway. And every difficult chapter starts contributing to the person you're becoming. The truth is that some people enter your life to stay. Others enter your life to awaken you. The second group often leaves the deepest scars, but they also leave behind the greatest opportunities for transformation. One day, you may look back at the person who walked away without a word, and instead of anger, instead of confusion, instead of longing, you feel gratitude, not for the pain they caused, but for the strength their departure forced you to discover. Because their silence pushed you toward a version of yourself that would never have existed otherwise. And that version of you no longer needs explanations to move forward, no longer needs validation to feel worthy, no longer needs someone else's presence to feel complete. That is freedom. And freedom is far more valuable than closure. So, what does it truly mean when someone walks away without saying a word? Perhaps it means they were carrying battles they could not explain. Perhaps it means they lacked the courage to communicate. Perhaps it means your presence revealed truths they were not prepared to face. Or perhaps it means something you'll never fully understand. and that's okay. Because the most important lesson was never hidden inside their silence. It was hidden inside your response to it. The moment someone leaves, life quietly places a choice before you. You can spend years chasing answers from a closed door, or you can turn around and discover the countless doors still waiting to be opened. One path leads to endless questions, the other leads to growth, to wisdom, to peace. And maybe that's why some endings arrive without explanation, not because you're meant to understand them, but because you're meant to outgrow them. So if someone walked away from your life without saying goodbye, let them carry their silence. You don't have to carry it anymore, because your story was never supposed to end where theirs did. It continues here, with you, with your growth, with your future. And perhaps the most beautiful chapter of your life is the one you're about to write next. If this message resonated with you, leave a comment below with one word: freedom. Not for the person who left, but for the person you're becoming.